we're going to talk about kind of the next frontier, which is consumer IoT, consumer Internet of Things. And I do want to welcome to the stage the one and only, the lovely Bloomberg Technology reporter, Julie Verhage. Fun.
Okay, I think we're on. Yes, fabulous. All right, welcome, guys. So like Carol said, tough act to follow with her. We're going to be talking a little bit about this explosion in personal data, right? This everything from health. We obviously heard a lot about this yesterday if you're watching the Apple announcement. It's something that all of a sudden we can learn a lot more about ourselves in terms of heart rate and everything going on in terms of like what our bodies are doing, ways to improve it, et cetera. And today we have three amazing panelists on here with me to talk about that. We've got, make sure I say their names right here, Rohit Prasad, Vice President and Head Scientist at Amazon for their Alexa, Dennis Mortensen, CEO and co-founder of x.ai, and Shelton Ewan, Vice President of Research at Fitbit. Welcome, guys, and thank you for traveling to New York City to do this for us today. First off, let's just talk about, there's been a huge wave of innovation the past couple of years in just, all of a sudden wearables were a really big thing. Move over a little bit here. I'm way over on the other side.
Come closer.
So a big wave in just sort of this disruption in sort of the wearable space. So let's just start on how we think that will evolve. Like, what's the next wave of innovation there? Is it things like, doctors being able to look at all of our health data rather than going in for an appointment, and they have a good baseline of what is going on and what questions they might need to ask you even going into that? Like, where do you sort of see this going? I don't know, probably, you want to start off on this?
I'd be happy to get started. Thanks, everyone, for being here. Over the last 10 years or so, the adoption of wearable sensors has really grown a lot. I think 10 years ago, it was pretty uncommon for people to really be trying to monitor themselves in the way that they are today. It's pretty mainstream today. And in the next 10 years, I think that adoption rate will just continue to grow. A lot of what people think of wearables today is really around running or just sort of knowing what they're doing, their activity, maybe their sleep. But in the next 10 years, I think there's a real place for wearables, in particular Fitbit, where I'm from, in trying to advance the migration of this technology into healthcare, giving early warnings, perhaps, on conditions that you may not be aware of, because there are a lot of undiagnosed conditions in the US and all over the world. I think there's a real room for, in particular, machine learning on this type of data to give really early access to that kind of information, help you to seek medical attention, maybe years before you ordinarily would have.
Got it, yeah. And I mean, this is going to be, information technology is a multi-trillion-dollar industry within the next couple of years. How do you guys continue to make sure your companies respectively are at the forefront of innovation and driving, consumer growth and growth in those products that you guys are offering?
So I'm certainly not just optimistic, because I bet the last 5 years of my life on this kind of happening, that there'll be some sort of massive push towards perhaps a new UI. That might be too dramatic of a portrayal, but I certainly think we're moving towards some sort of conversational UI, which is rooted in a whole new kind of data set, whether that be personal or from elsewhere. And I think when we do arrive there, the way we interact with software might just change, where most of the software we use today assist us in doing a task just a little bit faster, a little bit more accurate, or just doing the task to begin with, right? And I think it might just flip for where I move to a new setting for where I actually don't want to be assisted in doing the task, as saying, let me go see whether I'm as healthy as I want to be. I want the machinery to kind of tell me whether I am, and if I am not, provide me a recommendation. Or in my kind of small world, for where we kind of created these agents that can schedule meetings, it's not that I actually don't know how to set up a meeting between you and I in downtown Manhattan next week. It's that I don't want to, and I want the machinery to kind of do it for me. So I'm super excited about this kind of shift, which data, which we're assembling right now, certainly allows us to kind of do over the next coming years. And you can call that many things, and it certainly starts to kind of rhyme with autonomy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's Amazon. I feel like, specifically Alexa, we are living in the promise of AI now, with voice computing, especially conversational artificial intelligence. redefining our daily lives. And this is super exciting times from that perspective. If you think about how AI can help, this is a classic example where the cognitive burden of what we do every day is shifting from us to the artificial intelligence. And this is where we're finding everything, like even simple things we started with, like on Alexa, was music. Who thought music can be redefined? But if you think about the years of progression, it was getting harder and harder to go and find your music as the whole set of catalogs was growing, as set of services were growing. And what we simplified there, even in a space where we thought is simple, was where you just ask your device to play the music you want. And that, surprisingly, is hard because we are not as very specific as the machine would like in terms of our preferences, in terms of what music taste we listen to. How we even then, the next wave was smart home and connected devices, how we want to interact with bulbs and lights and switches, thermostats. You just think about everything about this increase in the services, the connected devices, the applications out there. It's growing at an immense pace, and we want to simplify that. And that is what I think is happening in the wave of artificial intelligence, and data is key to that as well.
Right, and data's also come under scrutiny a little bit this year in just terms of like Facebook having a few problems in that area. How do you continue to convince your consumers that the privacy is there, you're being very careful with the data that they're sharing with you, and have enough of a value proposition that they're comfortable sharing that sometimes very personal information with each of you guys?
So first, to us, customer trust is paramount. It is of utmost importance. Our customers use our services because they trust it. For even when we, from day one of Amazon Echo, when we launched, we took extreme steps to make sure customers were going to be comfortable with the device. And the way we did it were simple things once you put customers first in your picture. And that way, take for example, there is a hardware button on top which disables Alexa completely. It won't detect even the on-device wake word, which is Alexa or another one that you can choose. So on the device, we just do wake word detection, essentially the keyword that you want to address Alexa as. And then even once it has detected the keyword, then it streams to the cloud. And when it's streaming, there's a clear light indicator that says, hey, I heard you say Alexa, and now I'm streaming to the cloud to process your utterance. After that, when it's done presenting the results, you can anytime go to the application, look at what was spoken, delete it, and you can even go and completely delete all the utterances that has been recorded for you. So that's the way we have been very transparent, and this was just the first set of simple things. And I think this is a very important issue that we have to always put the customer first. It's your data. We want the controls in your hand.
And I think there's perhaps a beginning to some setting for where users start to kind of educate themselves on, if I get access to this service, how do they utilize my data? And they might not think in those terms, but I certainly think they have some idea of whether if I pay you $10 or $5 or provide you something, what I get in return is this service, and you might not have to kind of monetize my data. I think there's certainly the inklings of a pool of consumers that can see, where do I pay for where the data which I kind of surrender is kind of what I want to surrender because I like the service which they provide me, and what are other settings for where that is slightly more opaque and I'm perhaps not fully aware of it, and that can be kind of certainly something that provides uncertainty. But I do think we're starting to see them not only care, but to understand a little bit about who's trying to kind of extract value from the data itself and who's trying to use the data to provide the service which they're buying.
Sean?
Yeah, I would add in wearables, I think it's very similar. You have to put the user first. That's paramount. In the case of wearables, the service is actually getting data. People want to wear these devices. They want to wear Fitbits in order to know more about their heart rate, about their sleep, their activity.
If I forget to turn on my fitness tracker when I do a workout, I feel like it just didn't even happen. Like I have to go work out again because I didn't get the data tracked.
Right. Yeah, I think there's a great reinforcing loop.
See, everyone agrees. It's true.
Yeah, I agree. So I think there's a great reinforcing loop to change people's behavior, get them really moving and taking control of their health right now, instead of waiting maybe 10 years, 20 years from now to have a sentinel medical event, right? Now, I think the one key to this, though, is to make sure that we're always protecting that data and being very secure with it. And we've always been very proactive, and I would think that all of us have to be very proactive in this sensing space in making sure that that is maintained, that we can maintain this user trust. A few years back, we worked with an advocacy group called the Center for Democracy and Technology, CDT, and we actually published, Fitbit and CDT published a paper about how to do privacy-aware research in wearables in particular. And a lot of it's really about trying to give people informed consent, giving them an understanding of what they're about to do, how that data will be used, and if it's going to be shared with who and in what way. Is it anonymized, et cetera. And I think that is the basis by which a lot of how this actually has to work goes, right? So when we think of GDPR, which is a great step forward in European law, that helps really clarify the role of the user and their ownership in this data. I think that's a great step forward, and we're definitely moving towards that and embracing that, and trying to make sure that all users actually have access to that type of ability to control their data, delete it, et cetera.
Got it. And you did the transition for me. GDPR was my next question. So you've sort of answered that a little bit. How has GDPR impacted you guys? Have you done any changes internally? I mean, we kind of knew it was coming for a little while, but...
I think we were, as I said, we always focus on the customer, and trust is super important, especially in this new space. And we had a lot of our steps in there. What we've made it is also easy at the Amazon level for you to go to a single page and then find all the services that you're using, like retail, devices, and entertainment services that we have. So you can get help on privacy in one place. That's pretty awesome. And then from an Alexa-specific point of view, we have added a few more functionality in terms of, like, you can even delete utterances from a particular date range, for instance. Also, you can, if there are more easy ways to manage the permissions you've given to the skills. And so these are the specific steps we have taken in addition. And lastly, you can even, if you want to opt out of using your voice for new features we are building, you have that functionality as well.
We obviously take in sensitive data, right, for where some VC in Manhattan use Amy or Andrew to schedule a meeting with some potential kind of company which they might invest in, might even have the next kind of 8 meetings for the due diligence and follow-up, and they certainly don't want that exposed. So we almost immediately made sure that we could adhere to GDPR, not just for our customers in Europe, but globally. And then again, we don't have anything outside of the service itself, so we're not trying to monetize the data. I'm just making sure that whatever data which you provide me, I use that to provide the best possible service. And it certainly, go speak to any of the engineers down on Wall Street on my team, friction, and it's annoying, and it's certainly much nicer if you just kind of run wild, because you don't have to kind of really think through the kind of complications that comes along with adhering to this. But it was certainly not an obstacle for us to the extent for where we had to kind of mull over. Do we kind of discard a set of markets because we can't support them, but just leaned into it very early on?
Got it. So in terms of the second wave of the innovation in all of this, in particular for like the wearables, have you gotten a lot of really good reception from places like hospitals, doctors wanting to use this, and what has that sort of relationship looked like?
You know, I think we've been very lucky. Fitbit is probably the premier wearable in academic and clinical research. I think something on the order of 85% of public academic research using wearable uses Fitbit, and about the same percentage of clinical trials. I think 95% of NIH-funded research using wearables uses Fitbit. So we've seen actually a large adoption of this type of technology. I think people are aware of the benefit of getting this kind of longitudinal data at relatively low cost on large populations. And we've done a number of pioneering studies. They're in progress with Dana-Farber, Mayo Clinic, looking at wearables and how they can have a role in looking at outcomes, whether it's post-operative outcomes for types of certain procedures, or in prevention of certain diseases. So we think there's a lot of interest there. And I don't know if you're aware, but there's this NIH All of Us sort of initiative that seeks to basically get data on 1 million Americans. All kinds of data, genetic information, et cetera. And Fitbit is the first wearable in that program to try to get this type of longitudinal data on a large group. So we think there's a lot of interest there. It'll take time, obviously, because we have to show efficacy, and we have to show that there's real benefit for medicine as well as for the user.
Right. Rohit, what about Amazon? Obviously, you talked about how it's changed from just the days of play this song for me or whatever. Where do you see that voice technology going in the future? Am I going to be ordering a bunch of things on there outside of just Amazon, or what does that relationship look like?
So first, we have customers, millions of customers interacting billions of times a month, right? So we're very proud of where we are in this space. A great adoption, and not only in the consumer space, but what we are also finding that developers are very excited about Alexa. And we have now 50,000 skills on Alexa and you go back 4 years back when we launched it, there were only a handful. So this has been an exponential growth. And Alexa is not just on our devices. There are 20,000 distinct devices that have Alexa, and it's growing as well, which is devices not built by us. Just similarly, it's not all skills are built by us. So this is where our general philosophy is to do the right thing for the customer in terms of giving them choices on all services. We offer that through music. If you think about it, we have our own Amazon Music service, but if you are a Spotify customer, you can access Spotify on your account. You can even use Pandora or any other service that you've subscribed to that's currently supported. So we have the same philosophy here. We want to give customers choice and make the best decision on customers' behalf. So we'll continue to follow that philosophy.
Got it. Is there areas for you guys to expand to right now? It's largely, scheduling type things, but could you see that technology being used elsewhere?
So it's super easy to be kind of half-assed at 6 things, right? It's almost impossible to be world-class at one thing, but you should at least try. So me and my 100 propeller head friends down on Wall Street are trying to be really, really good at getting that meeting on your calendar for next Wednesday at 1 o'clock on 200 Broadway. The challenge, though, is that, as you most certainly know, language is not a solved science, and humans are fucking crazy. So when you take in some request, you have to figure out how to decipher that, and that is hard. And we spent short of 5 years in that basement trying to just solve a very small version of this universe. Your universe is obviously much, much larger and perhaps more horizontal, but we're going extremely deep to see if we cannot solve it in full. So however you want to negotiate between you, me, 2 colleagues, 1 mandatory, 1 in Boston, at my office, and all of those things that comes along with that negotiation, we want to make sure that we can do that well. I think where you'll see us expand is certainly, and there's a direct relationship between, you might have similar metrics that you can't disclose, but I can certainly say that there's a direct relationship between accuracy and retention. That means the more accurate the agent, the more likely it is that the customer kind of sticks around. And you must see the same on 8 failed queries. The amount of queries next week are probably less, or some version of that.
And this is where when we launched Alexa, we said, we made a promise to our customers that it will keep getting smarter every day. And that's where we have thousands of people focused on that by inventing state-of-the-art machine learning technologies and applying it at scale of this kind where it's always getting smarter. And at that point, you have to rely more, when you have billions of interactions, you have to rely more on more unsupervised learning instead of any supervised or manual learning, which is why what's also this is doing, just to answer in terms of every time an utterance fails, it pains me. So from that perspective, it should pain Alexa. And the way Alexa handles it is by learning by more unsupervised signals and more other techniques, like where if you barged in on a music that we played for you, perhaps we did something wrong when you said Alexa stop. So these are the kind of things that's making Alexa smarter. And I completely agree with you that language is very ambiguous. We take it for granted, and it's very hard to separate language from intelligence. And when we couple that, that's the challenge that the AI has to solve. So the language is easily taken to be simple, but it's incredibly hard.
But obviously, both you and I are super excited about where we're headed here. But I would want to kind of encourage you to at least imagine if we kind of look at that set of prior UIs, right? I'm certainly, sadly, old enough to remember of having taken my CS degree on the command line, and that was the only way you could get access to compute 25 years ago. I can certainly remember giving my mom a PC and a graphical user interface and teaching her a Excel spreadsheet. And I can certainly remember my daughter is kind of getting access to a mobile UI, and whether you agree that those are the 3 kind of paradigms, they might or might not be. But I certainly think we can agree that the conversational UI is distinct in its own right. And I think as we move into that, there'll be a whole host of prior applications that don't really belong in any one of the prior paradigms. And here's a good example. So if I go to, when I go to San Francisco next week and I arrive at 11 p.m. and I want a Diet Coke when I sit at the Hilton, my first line of thought is not, you know what? Let me go to the App Store. Let me find the Hilton app. Fuck, there's like 11 Hilton apps. Let me pick the one for the US. Let me download, install it. Let me set up a new set of credentials with a login and a password I can't remember 10 minutes from now. Let me log in. Let me find the store. Let me add Diet Coke to basket. Let me find my credit card. Let me click checkout. Like, I fucking died before I got that Diet Coke. I said, that just doesn't work. But somehow, we reached this point where the app was supposed to be the solution to every pain that we had, and that's just not the case. What should have happened is there should be an election in the corner of that room. I sit in my underwear, I scream Diet Coke, I close my eyes. 5 minutes later, and a Diet Coke arrives. I said, that is the optimal UI for that particular pain. And that's a funny story, but there's 100,000 of those apps in the App Store right now, which are kind of equally funny, but probably equally sad, because they actually don't belong there. They belong in a different paradigm. And sure, I'm just myself picking one particular pain for where when you and me are supposed to set up a meeting, I actually don't like doing the, hey, can you do next week? Yeah, can you do Wednesday? No, can you do Thursday? Yeah, can you do 1? No, I can do 2. Can you come to my office? I'd be rather you come to my office. Then I can do 2:15. Okay, you're going to send an invite? You know what? Bugger off. I lost interest in doing the meeting to begin with, right? So there's just a certain set of things that I think will have to move on to this kind of new paradigm, and that certainly excites me.
Yeah, talking about the new paradigm a bit too, is there a world where all of this is sort of wrapped into one, where I ask Alexa, how did I do on my Fitbit tracking today, or whatever that is?
Absolutely, yeah. That exists. In fact,
there's 50,000 skills or whatever you said. I don't know all of that.
well, that's the whole idea. There's a skill for every occasion. You shouldn't be thinking about what skill I need. You should just speak to Alexa. I was actually talking to someone and I said, there's a skill that tells you about tides. And this person said, yeah, I am an avid surfer, and I simply asked Alexa, when is high tide? And it told me. And that is not a skill that we built. There is a skill that's already there. I even didn't know about it. And I just stumbled on it because of one of my friends who's a surfer, right? So from that perspective, that's the whole idea. And thank you, Dennis, for that colorful rendition, because I couldn't have done that better. But that's the whole idea, where you do not have to think about apps and services and devices. Things must happen seamlessly. And it's our job, as in the AI's job, to make that connection for you for exactly what you need. Whether it's Diet Coke or diapers or anything else in terms of playing content or controlling, turning your garage light. I mean, you really don't want to find an app and then open that app and then turn off your garage light. You just want to say, Alexa, turn off the garage light.
Yeah, I think a lot of what we're speaking about is friction. Friction in the user experience, whether it's through a sort of voice as an input and output, or just using AI in order to determine things that maybe you weren't really aware of. When we think back to the sort of health part, a lot of us really push out our health until much later into the future. I'm healthy right now. I'm okay. I can sleep for 5 hours. I don't have to run, and I can't eat that bacon cheeseburger like I did yesterday in the airport. And that's okay. But the more that we can present this collect this data, and then use intelligence around it to say, really you shouldn't eat that. Maybe you should have a salad, or maybe you really should go for that run, or maybe even next level would be, now it's time to run a little bit further. Maybe it's time to get up and move during your workday, because most of us actually sit during the, sorry, I have a feeling all of us probably sit most of the time.
The rest of the panel's standing now.
We've done some studies looking at our data, and we find that in the US, people are basically sitting still for 6 hours during the workday. And that's a long time, right? And there are a lot of studies that show that sitting still or being very sedentary for long periods of time is not good for your health in the long term. But that's really hard to connect today, right? And there's a friction to that, to trying to say, I am actually going to get up and take a break right now. There's a lot of elements to trying to build a UI that can work to try to offset these types of issues. So for instance, we have a feature called Reminders to Move. I don't know if any of you use Fitbit, but you may have seen it. It'll try to remind you to get up and move every hour. Right? And you might think, oh, that's a cute feature. Every hour it sort of bugs me, and maybe I'll get up and do that. We actually spent about 6 months and tested on over 500 people to get that just right, so that it would be a good intervention to get people to move. Because I had if you rewind in history, I actually had this hypothesis about how to do this. Turns out that people move on the hour. As you might expect, it's because of calendaring, right? Everyone starts their meetings on the hour. So I had this hypothesis, you know what? Let's wait until the hour mark, and then let's bug everybody, get up and move, right? And we tried that, and everyone hated that because they said, you know, I'm getting up and moving right now. Why is Fitbit bugging me right now, right? So we actually did several iterations on this, and instead give a subtle reminder. It says, you know, it's almost the end of the hour. Why don't you try to get some motion in? And if you do get that motion in, we celebrate that. And that ends up being a great reinforcement mechanism that breaks down friction, because it works with natural human behavior and is delightful in a way that actually gets you to change something today.
How do you do the same thing for, hey, you should have that salad instead of the cheeseburger or something like that? Because there is a certain point where I'm like, screw you, Fitbit, I'm having the cheeseburger. I'm not eating the salad today.
You know, there are more advancements to make on food logging. So you know, there are potentially enablers that could go down and make this a lot easier. I think friction is right now understanding what people are eating. So in a dream scenario, the sensor may just know what you're eating, but I think that's unlikely, at least in the near term. There are other things like photo food logging, voice logging, where potentially that could be a mechanism to understand what people are eating a little bit easier. There are also just other simple UI tricks, things that just make the friction a lot lower so that you don't mind logging your food.
I do think that's a really good question, though, right? For where the more data we collect and the less friction is being applied to us getting access to it, the more likely it is that we'll be able to make a set of recommendations.
Yeah.
And I think up until this point, all of us in here, certainly my mom, is kind of very naive about who makes that set of recommendations. So go on to Netflix. I'm somehow skeptical of all of the best movies I should see are somehow movies that they produced. To me, that seems like, I think you're paying less royalty on those versus the other ones. So whatever kind of algorithm they put in place for that. So I think there's a fine line between an honest recommendation that serves me and being manipulated into doing something that serves whoever provides the service. And I'm not even sure that the services are trying to be evil per se, but it's certainly a pendulum that can swing from one side to the other. And I think it's been very easy up until this point to make kind of honest recommendations, but that's going to be difficult. And especially, and I love you guys, I have an Alexa, I get a ton of Diet Cokes, and it's great. So when I ask Alexa to buy me a set of batteries, somehow I get the Amazon batteries, right? That's not random. I'm not sure you wrote that algorithm, but that is not random, right? That means there's some sort of recommendation algorithm here that makes a choice that certainly serves Amazon. And I'm happy. Hey, I just need batteries. I don't have some sort of love relationship with a certain battery brand, but that's going to be really interesting. I think about that a lot. We do the same.
Actually, can I answer that simple use case
I'll
first?
I'll leave your defense till later. So
I'm looking at the time.
I'll let you answer.
We have something very similar, right, where we try to kind of determine whether you are potentially willing to meet up at my office. Because if you come to my office, I just save 30 minutes in commute from 57th Street down to Wall Street. That would be great. But I should make that recommendation if I think it's plausible that you will come to my office. I should also kind of make recommendations for where I don't suggest you come to my office at 8, because I can see in your past that you're kind of tardy, so you're probably going to turn up on time. So we're going to give you another time. So there's going to be a whole set of recommendations that we make that we kind of determine. And that type of exposure, which is outside of kind of what we talked about earlier, say GDPR and so on and so forth, that is more explainable AI for where something is happening here, for where you have very little insight to it. And I think we need to figure out how to provide transparency into some of these recommendations or decisions that are about to be taken on our behalf.
All right, batteries,
To the
last
defense
word.
on the batteries.
Last word.
First, agree wholeheartedly on the transparency. And one way, if you notice, like if you said, Alexa, order AA batteries, the way it's transparent, it will come back and say, I found this in your order history, or you've ordered in the past. So you must have ordered the Amazon basic battery. So
Good defense.